Bro, I just beat the beginner abyss in Wizardry that provided a better combat experience in the tutorial than Honkai Star Rail's done in its entirety, as well as delivered a better story. Now, does it look as good? No. But for story and gameplay, Wizardry obliterates Honkai Star Rail. However, it doesn't have the Hoyoverse tag, so nobody knows what the fuck it is, but it's so goddamn good. Fuck, I wish more people would play this shit. It's so fire.
1999, Sirotech Software was founded by Norman Sirotech, Robert Sirotech, and Robert Woodhead. The company published a database management program and a game called Galactic Attack before renaming the company to Sirtech. In 1981, Sirtech developers Andrew C. Greenberg and Robert Woodhead, while still students at Cornell University, created the first graphically rich incarnation of Dungeons & Dragons gameplay for computers, Wizardry. And it was a hit, receiving incredible word of mouth and being dubbed as a standard by which all other fantasy RPGs should be compared to at the time. Wizardry begins with a town presented with a text-based menu. Players create a party of up to 6 characters. They get 5 choices for race, which can be male or female, 3 choices for alignment, and 4 choices for basic classes. Good and evil characters were normally restricted from being in the same party. There were also 4 elite classes that would unlock for the player after progressing to a certain point in the gameplay. Patient players could re-roll character creation in the hopes of getting more bonus points to allocate into up to 6 stats that determine the performance of the characters for certain actions. These stats and alignments also must meet prerequisites to become certain classes. Characters also have an age that determines how easily they might lose stats when they level up, and actions such as resting or class changing age characters. In town, players could rest, level up, change character class, exchange party members, manage inventories, engage in buying, selling, or identifying items.
Can you imagine being back when video games first came out and Pong was like the premier game? And dude, I used to play Pac-Man and Doug for hours when I was a kid. That's what's nuts.
Revive party members.
I'm so glad I was born when I was born.
Wizardry was an early example of a dungeon crawler in which players would traverse a dungeon in first-person view. The goal in Wizardry was to make it to the bottom floor and defeat the evil arch-wizard Wordna. On the way, players would encounter enemies, traps, treasures, and puzzles. As players adventured, they would find better equipment and accumulate experience to level up back in town. Magic followed a tiered usage system in which players would unlock new tiers of spells as they leveled up and received more casts of spells they had already learned. The game doesn't keep a map of your location, so most players would use graph paper to draw their own maps of the floors, which were 20 by 20 grids that could sometimes confusingly wrap around. Each
players would have to draw their own maps. That's
made
insane.
Very few, if any, significant changes to the gameplay framework of Wizardry created by
the old days,
which is probably why the series eventually waned in popularity toward the dawn of the millennium when compared to other RPGs that were emerging or innovating with their subsequent games. Some notable changes between games were the addition of new classes, a movement away from text to more detailed graphics, cleaner audio, new stats like karma, more detailed stories, and multiple endings. In 1996, there was one very different official spin-off of the Wizardry series called Nemesis, the Wizardry Adventure, which played out with real-time fighting in a first-person view with one character.
Holy fuck.
In 1998, Sirtech USA closed,
bet this
and in
shit looked
2003,
real back in the
Sirtech
day.
Canada Limited went defunct. But while Wizardry's
I bet
glory
people
days
couldn't
were
distinguish
over,
this
and
from
there
real
would be
life
no
when
more
they played
official
it back in
Sirtech
fucking
Wizardry
1995.
games. This is far from the end of the story. Wizardry wasn't the first nor only RPG.
I have a hot take. I think the graphics of Earth were worse like years ago. I think everything just looked worse.
Video game
right, like graphics didn't get better, like everything got better.
It had already released Aklabath in 1979 and Ultima in June of 1981, but Wizardry definitely made the biggest splash, selling 24,000 copies in a 9-month period. The series ended up selling over 5 million copies by 1996.
Never
but
mind.
The thing that got my attention, and was my entire reason for making this video, was Wizardry's influence on the formation of the JRPG genre and the game's lasting popularity in Japan. Whether you believe Dragon Quest was the first JRPG or not, it's undeniable that it was the best-selling and most influential RPG in Japan, and the example many people would point to when asked what a JRPG truly is, at least in the 1980s and 90s. And even if Final Fantasy was the only JRPG you played at the time, and that game was your first example of a JRPG, it too had its influences from Wizardry. Dragon Quest creator Yuji Horii is a huge fan of Wizardry and even got the opportunity to meet with Robert Woodhead in 2022. Dragon Quest borrowed the top-down traversal made popular in Ultima. It took elements of the random encounter system in Wizardry that put the player in a first-person view for combat, and also borrowed elements of the game's stat system. Much like how Wizardry simplified the mechanics of pen and paper Dungeons and Dragons by having the computer do the calculations, Yuji Horii
Dude, Dungeons and Dragons, man. That's something that I would love to build more on my channel. Because, like, oh, man. Sitting down with your homies in real life and RPing that shit. Oh, man. Dungeons and Dragons still hits. Like, oh, man. It's so fucking good. I wish there was more space for something like that on, like, YouTube and Twitch.
simplified the gameplay of Dragon Quest even further by removing player choice in class, character, and stat allocation. Even spellcasting was simplified by drawing from a currency of magic points instead of a pool of tiers and uses. Because players were controlling a single main character of his design, Yuji Horii was able to tell a more detailed story. The game system itself would allocate stats and make sure players were powerful enough to overcome the game's challenges simply by leveling up and obtaining stronger equipment. This simplification of RPG systems gave Dragon Quest an extraordinary level of accessibility for new players, much more than Wizardry had. It was so accessible, I was able to play through the entire game at the age of 8. Of course, I could barely understand the game's weird Shakespearean English, but it still left a lasting impression on me. Another one of Japan's bigger RPGs, Final Fantasy, similarly took influence from Wizardry and Ultima. Akitoshi Kawazu, the battle system designer for Final Fantasy, implemented the first elemental weakness system in a JRPG into Final Fantasy.
Yeah, I wonder how long it took him to power creep that and made a character that just ignored all the elemental weakness systems. Yeah, I wonder. You think they made Acheron back in 1982?
An idea he got from its implementation in Wizardry. Final Fantasy still kept the choices simple, but it gave players...
How can anybody ever think that making a turn-based RPG with an element system, it's a good idea to make somebody who ignores the entire element system? Who thinks that's a good idea?
There's the option to create their own party of warriors
so
of
good.
light from a set choice of basic classes.
Oh, I know this little guy. This guy's design is so iconic, man. Look at that. Little Vivi. So cute.
Just like Wizardry did, that could later age into an advanced class. Final Fantasy's magic system also followed Wizardry's tiers and uses system, but you had to buy the spells to learn them instead of getting them automatically with level up.
So
of course,
cute.
Both Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy also had extraordinarily talented composers in Nobuo Uematsu and Koichi Sugiyama, and artists in Yoshitaka Amano and Akira Toriyama that became famous and just distinguished the RPGs even more as uniquely Japanese RPGs.
You know what one of the best things for turn-based RPGs is? Not having a health bar. I think health bars usually make games worse. I think it's so cool when you don't know if the final attack is going to be the final attack. And games like Wizardry and Monster Hunter do a great job of that. It's nice because in Wizardry, then you have to learn more about each mob that you're fighting on a frequent occasion. You learn how much damage you need to do, and then you remember that for shaping the way that you play. And for Monster Hunter, you get to see the monster get affected the lower HP they are and shift the way they fight. Love it. Not for me, sorry. Yeah, it's not for everybody, but I really enjoy no health bar games.
Another flagship Japanese RPG series, often considered the third most popular in Japan by some, got its start by borrowing elements from Wizardry. The first game never got a Western localization due to its heavy religious references. This game heavily borrowed the first-person dungeon crawling mechanics and was said to be almost a complete clone of Wizardry before clear effort was made to differentiate the game from it during its development. Demon negotiations allowing demon recruitment were added. Each demon had their own alignment. The game eventually evolved into a very original, mature RPG experience. If my description wasn't enough for you to guess, that game was Digital Devil's Story, Megami Tensei, which would go on to spawn the monolithic Megami Tensei series of JRPGs.
Wait, is this Persona? Is this the Atlas RPG? Oh, maybe we play that too. I do really want to play Metaphor Refantasio, but I'm not ready to go down to 800 viewers while I play that.
Wizardry's legacy doesn't end there, though. In the West, it influenced games like The Bard's Tale and Might and Magic.
Oh my God, Bard's Tale was so good. I have not heard anybody give that a shout in 10 years.
In Japan, Wizardry's influence is so massive that developers continue to license the IP and create new games and products over there long after Surtech's complete dissolution in 2003. So, how popular is Wizardry in Japan? There were 8 official numbered titles created by Surtech in the West from 1981 to 1982. And there were over 39 spin-off Wizardry titles created in Japan between 1991 and 2022. Very few of which which actually got localized in the West. Wizardry's prominence in Japan is such that I wouldn't even be shocked if younger fans of the newer games didn't know that Wizardry was even a Western RPG in the 80s and 90s. Japan took the inch Wizardry had in the West and literally went a mile with it. In Japan, there is the Wizardry Guidance series, Wizardry Empire series, Wizardry Tale of the Forsaken Land, Wizardry Exith series, and Wizardry Renaissance. In addition to traditional games, there are MMORPGs, mobile games, social networking games, clicker games, and roguelikes. So many Japanese dungeon crawlers use Wizardry as their starting point, like Elmenage, Operation Abyss, Operation Babel, Stranger in Sword City, and Demon Gaze. Two games I reviewed very recently on my channel, Class of Heroes 1 and 2, are pretty much Wizardry in a high fantasy anime school setting.
Oh, that's
modeling
awesome.
After the Wizardry.
Damn!
Pretty much Wizardry in a high fantasy anime school setting.
Who that? Holy shit!
Modeling after the Wizardry Exith framework. The developers of the Class of Heroes series even went on to make an actual Wizardry game called Wizardry Labyrinth of Lost Souls in 2009, which was one of the lucky ones that got localized into English by Xseed in 2020. Japan absolutely loves these games, and even dungeon crawling RPGs that aren't influenced by Wizardry remain a popular, if not extraordinarily accessible genre of game in Japan. In Japan, Wizardry also has light novels, mangas, pen and paper RPGs, and an anime OVA. Kumo Kagyu brilliantly referenced the first floor of the dungeon of Wizardry Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord in the 11th episode of the second season of the Goblin Slayer anime. I can't show the covers due to their graphic violence, but he also wrote dark fantasy light novels using the Wizardry worldview called Blade and Bastard that have English translations.
I want to read that. I'm going to read that.
And some pretty decent reviews. These days, if you look at modern Final Fantasy, Megami Tensei, or Dragon Quest titles, there's very little trace of any influence from Wizardry. Even the Megami Tensei games have mostly moved away from their dungeon crawling roots and into open worlds or carefully crafted levels with 3D battle designs. As for me, I was a little bit too young to appreciate Wizardry when I first played it. Even the English localized original Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest were barely at my comprehension level when I first enjoyed them, and Wizardry was just too much for my 8-year-old kid brain when I rented the NES version from Blockbuster Video in 1990. It wasn't until much later.
Dude, I remember when I was a little kid, I was too dumb to fucking beat Mario, bro. I would be afraid of the Goombas because I was like, how the fuck am I going to beat a Goomba? How am I going to do that? However, I got smarter because then I was the only kid in 3rd grade that could beat the Elite Four in Pokemon. To where I would go on people's accounts in Pokemon and I would have to beat the Elite Four for them because they couldn't figure out how to do it. Oh man, I felt so goated. I was like that Yu-Gi-Oh retard that was just crush people at fucking Yu-Gi-Oh, bro. It was so sick.
Later in life that I enjoyed Stranger in Sword City, and very recently the first 2 Class of Heroes games. Those 3 games are probably the closest to classic Wizardry that I've ever played through. Even though Wizardry is more of a game I respect than a game I enjoy, its influence on the RPG genre I love as a whole is undeniable. A full 3D remake of the original Wizardry Proving Ground of the Mad Overlord is in early access on Steam right now, and
That's awesome.
Seems like fans of Wizardry are really enjoying it. The game is set to officially release in a few days on May 23rd, 2024. Thank you for watching and have a great day.
Nah, bro, just play Wizardry Variants Daphne. That shit is fucking gas.